Next Sunday is going to mark the 10th anniversary of our Beulah Land Retreats guest house. We hosted our first pastoral guest 10 years ago on May 18th, and it'll be 10 years that we've been hosting pastors and missionaries and their families. Many of you are aware of our ministry, but right now every year we have around 50 pastors, missionaries, their families come and stay at either our guest house or our RV. And as I think about that time, it's amazing, how time just goes by. It's kind of become commonplace to us now where we don't think much about it because it's just part of our everyday life. We'll often have guests in our house, and like somebody's driving down your driveway. It's like that happens all the time. This time of year, we have tons of people drive up and down our driveway all the time. But as I think about that time, and I know I've mentioned it before, it was a very significant time in our family. One of the reasons is because God was calling us from a place that really was comfortable. When we lived in Wisconsin, we lived around Grandma and Grandpa. Anytime we needed babysitters or needed to go somewhere or just wanted a break, Grandma and Grandpa were always willing to watch the kids. We lived in a place where aunts and uncles were there, that any type of tool I needed or equipment, somebody I knew had that. We lived in a beautiful parsonage right next to the church. We lived in a church that things were going well. And God called us to come here, and we really knew nobody in Beulah and Benzonia. We didn't know. We knew one of the pastors a little bit that at that time was in Interlochen, and that's all we knew. And we felt at that time very familiar with the story of Abraham being called from his home country to go to a place where you don't really know that much about. And it was a great test of faith for us, and yet I relate so much with Abram in this as we see the example of how God proved himself faithful. And we're going to start our study. We're in the patriarchs. We're going to be going through Abram, or eventually Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, down to Joseph as we study through the book of Genesis. And the core of this foundation, or the building blocks really of the Jewish faith. And it begins with our study here that we're going to talk about, and that's Abram. We'll be with Abraham the next several weeks as we study this great man of God, this great man of faith. If you remember last week, we left off as Noah and his family were spared because of the ark. They were spared the flood that existed on the whole earth at that time. So Noah starts over with his 3 children and their wives, and basically their descendants begin to spread out. We talked about of the Tower of Babel. And then what happens in Genesis chapter 11 is it records a genealogy basically from Noah down to a man named Terah. Now, if everything is exactly right in the genealogy, it's around 1,500 years. By that I'm meaning sometimes when you study genealogies, it can't be exactly right because they just go from certain things. Sometimes possibly they miss generations. We're not fully sure, but around 1,500 years is what you would take if you calculated that. So from Noah to what we're talking about. So understand, in our study of Genesis, in the last 2 weeks, we've covered 3,000 years of time. That's quite a bit. And so it's hard to imagine or fathom that because we live just a very, very short portion of that. It's only been 2,000 years since Jesus was here on the earth. And so this was almost 1,500 years. That's a long time period. The earth is growing in its population. We reach down here to Genesis chapter 11, verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in the Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife, Milcah. and the name of Haran, or the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. This is our first introduction to Abram and Sarai, which we eventually are going to know as Abraham and Sarah. But their name isn't changed just yet. We'll cover that next week, their name change. But here, our first introduction, and what do they say about her? One of the first mentions is she was barren. Very important, because that plays a huge role in the story of Abraham and Sarai. Verse 31, Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, we are not told why initially that Terah, Abram's father, left Ur to go to the land of Canaan. For some reason, we don't know if God had originally laid it on Terah's heart and mind to go to Canaan, or if he just heard something about it. We have no idea. All we know is what Scripture tells us. And so he was going to travel there, but instead they hit a place called Haran, which was really quite comfortable, and they decided to settle there. Just to get our biblical understanding, there's a lot of biblical geography that maybe is not that important, but this really is an understanding biblical geography. Of course, you have the land of Canaan, which eventually became the land of Israel. This is the land of Babylon, which is talked about many times. This region right here is very important for Bible history. This here eventually would be kind of the Assyrian nation would eventually be here, and of course the Babylonian nation. He started out here somewhere around Ur, which was somewhere near the area of Babylon. And they travel up, and of course they travel this way. Now, we can't see it on this map, but this is the main reason right here. They don't just take a straight line. Straight line you think would be the easiest until you have to travel through the Arabian desert. You don't want to do that. They would travel in all the trade routes, and even when the Israelites were taken captivity many years later into Babylon, they would have come up basically the same route that existed for really thousands of years, because it goes along the Euphrates River. So they find a really nice place, Haran, to basically settle down, for their animals to be able to be there, for their family to grow, for their servants. And so Abram is right now from there. He's not from there, he's from Ur, but he goes up to Haran. They settled there. By the way, this is an interesting note in the Old Testament. We're going to see this again today. Does it seem kind of ironic that they settled in Haran, and yet Abram's brother's name who died was Haran? Well, most likely this wasn't named Haran when they moved there, but they named it after Abram's brother. We're going to see that many times in the Bible, because what they're doing is when they're writing to the Israelites hundreds of years later, they're using the current name to describe an old place. We still do that today. We would use a current name to describe something that wasn't named that many years ago. So if we were describing, let's say, something that happened in Traverse City, we would say, oh, that happened in Chum's Corner. Well, it wasn't named Chum's Corner to, I don't know when it was named that. I did look that up once, but I can't remember. But if it happened there before that, we would say it happened near Chum's Corner, which if it happened 150 years ago, it wasn't called Chum's Corner. So that's what they do in the Bible, is they name certain names. So the reason it's named Haran, not most likely, is they named it, they settled there because it was an unsettled land, territory, and they built a city there, named it Haran out of respect for Abram's brother. We're going to see that later today, so I wanted to point that out because you will see that in Scripture several times. What we see, though, from this is that God called Abraham to step out in faith. Abraham is often used in the Bible as the